Have you ever read a book where you find yourself so attracted to the plot because it's just so good and it just keeps giving everything that you have desired, but then the characters are just so incredibly insufferable? Well, this is what happens with Interview with a Vampire. I have a lot to say about this. Hello everyone, this is Darkest Tower Reads, and today I want to do a summary and a discussion of Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I know that I think there's two films about this book and also there's one series, but I want to discuss about the book specifically. So there might be some slight differences if you have seen the series or if you have seen the movies, but I want to base my discussions on the original source. So first things first, as always, the summary of the book of Interview with a Vampire is about the life story of Louis, who is the rightful heir of a plantation in America. So we start the book with Louis already being immortal and in the present, and basically he tells his whole life story since he was born until he becomes immortal, and then what happens afterwards, so when he is transformed. And basically at the start of the book we see how Louis is a very young rich man who basically is set to control his family, right? Not only his plantation, but also to control what his younger sisters and what his younger brother does as well. So he's literally the patriarch of his family. And obviously we see that even though he's a young man, he still has this mentality of caring for his family. He cares and he's worried about who his sisters will marry or what will his brother do, even though he's not the rightful heir, right? And then after his younger brother passing away, he is filled with guilt and with grief because basically the brother passed away because of an accident when they had an argument. So also I have to mention that I believe, in my opinion, that the brother was mentally unstable, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, he is filled with mourn and with grief when he meets Lestat, who is the vampire that turns him into a vampire. Then the other parts of the book are about after Louis is transformed, how he lives with Lestat as a new vampire, and then how he lives the rest of his life until the time of the interview, and how he experiences immortality and experiences vampirism, which is really interesting, right? But just like continuing with the story, what happens afterwards after Louis is transformed is that he starts living with Lestat, who is the vampire that transforms him. And we see right away that the spell, or like the way that Louis saw Lestat, was very much he's like how a human would see a vampire, that he was just like so enamored and so filled with these human love for vampirism. And then once he gets transformed, he sees Lestat for who he is, which is a monster, right? And then we see all these very toxic and very manipulative relationship between Lestat and Louis, but on both sides, not only on Lestat but also on Louis. And then we see how he also turns a child into a vampire, who is Claudia. Also at the same time, again, the names, like that's how I pronounce them. Please, if I am pronouncing them incorrectly, please let me know on the comments. But yeah, Louis transforms Claudia, and then it's just the journey of him just becoming independent, or just him becoming a vampire, and all the mourning, all the grief that he has from actually, I wanted to punish myself, and by turning myself into a vampire and just dealing with this grief and in like an immortal way, in just like dealing with this grief for the rest of my life, and this life is infinite, to I regret me turning myself into a vampire, because now I am stuck with this vicious circle of hatred and self-hatred and these monstrous desires that I have for blood. Obviously, there is a lot that happens in the book, but I just don't want to give too much just in case someone wants to read the book as well. Now getting into the discussion, I have to say that I loved the plot of the book. I loved the way that vampirism is represented in it, but what I hated were the characters. They are insufferable. Like, honestly, it got to a point in the book that I was just thinking on stopping reading, because there is not a single character that is mentally sane and that is also like that also makes decisions that are normal regarding the situations, right? It's just like it got into a point where I was like, genuinely, I just want to I just want to get into the book, get transformed as a vampire, and just start slapping people up, because these people are stupid. And not only they are stupid, but they are just insufferable in the most horrible, disgusting way. Like, starting with Louis, like the main character, you would think that a writer would like the main character and would make him slightly agreeable or slightly likable, but like there's nothing to like about Louis. Okay, like you can tell me that like, oh, he's a nice person that was just consumed by grief. No, he was a dickhead. Like, in all senses of the words, he was so annoying. Like, not only when he was mortal, like when he was a human, but also as a vampire. So I didn't like Louis as a human, because obviously I understand that all the decisions that he makes are based on the love that he has for these people, or like for this person in specific. But it's just like, it got into a point where I was like, are you really making these decisions out of love, or are you making these decisions because you don't agree with the decisions that the person is making, right? That's why I think, even though it wasn't his fault that his brother passed away, I think he was responsible for him getting into that state, because he just was allowing this weird ass behavior, right? Also, at the same time, when he turns into a vampire, I think that Louis is the most passive person ever, and it just grinds my gears, because like he is literally what's the word, hold on, he is the kind of manipulator that is just like, he just manipulates people by being fucking useless. Okay, I looked it up because it's literally a mouthful, but I believe that Louis is a melancholic idealist that turns into an innocent manipulator. Okay, so he is the kind of person, and you see like every single time in every sentence that he writes, or like that he talks, he's literally just like showing his his mindset and how different he is, and how like melancholic and sad everything is, like specifically vampirism. But also, like, he just makes people do things for him because he is like an innocent manipulator, in the sense of like, he's so useless, or he shows himself as such a useless person that people do what he wants, or like people do what he desires, right? Like, we see it on Claudia, we see it on Lestat, we see it on Arman, we see everyone that Louis touches, they turn into the dominant person that just literally puts Louis in a bubble and just says like, oh, you need to be protected because you're such a good boy. Like, it just happens with all the characters, and it just pisses me off, because like Louis is so useless. He is just a sad, depressed person, or depressed vampire that is literally like forces people to do the things for him and just to sort his life out. Then we have Lestat, who is not better. Okay, like, I see on the internet, or I see on social media, on TikTok, people saying like, oh, I love Lestat, he's such an amazing character, he is like such a diva. He's not a diva, he is an insecure narcissist who is literally very mentally unwell. Okay, like, he's literally the kind of person that is like, he is jealous of the things that other people have, and just literally anything that happens in the world is somehow related to him and somehow another person's fault, and then he has to make a drama out of it and just has to create the biggest explosive behavior, and just he's just so full of rage when he's just like, this is not even about you and you're just using people in order to get what you want, which is, for example, he turns Louis into a vampire in order to get the money, in order to get all the power in the plantation so he can survive, or see he can get the money that he thinks he deserves. That's why he's like literally living like a fucking diva for the first, I don't know, the first 100 pages of the book. And then when Claudia appears, right, then he is upset because now the person that he has absolute control on, which is Louis, now there's someone else that is more dominant and that has more power over him. So therefore he gets in a tantrum and he gets upset because now it's like, oh, this thing that I actually gave you, which is a child, now this thing has more control over you than I used to have, so therefore I don't agree with this whole situation and I think we should separate. Like, I think you guys should separate and I should have control over you again. Like, he is such a pussy and he is such a I hate him. I will never ever like him. I don't care how much of a diva he is, how cunty he is disgusting and he pisses me off as well. And then don't even get me started on Claudia, because she is also evil. Like, she is the prime example of, like, you know those horror films where you have the evil doll that is possessed? That is Claudia. That is literally Claudia, right? Because, like, she finds herself in a situation where it's like she didn't choose to be a vampire. Like, she's the only character that did not choose to be a vampire. That was, like, vampirism was forced on her because the really poor decisions of Louis and his own mental state that he cannot control for the life of him. So therefore he just gets like a child. But like, she tends to be someone evil, and she, even though she is evil, she is the only character that I can excuse, and I will say it, like, I will talk about this later. So I'm not even gonna lie, but I think everything that happens in the book is because of Louis. Like, I think Louis is literally like the one problem, the elephant in the room that no one dares to talk about, right? Like, and also the relationship that Lestat and Louis and Claudia have are, it's literally like, okay, do you see all these like family relationships where the father is like absent and narcissistic, and then the mom is literally an emotional innocent manipulator that has an incestuous emotional relationship with the child? That is exactly what we see in this book, right? We see Lestat as an absent manipulator, well, as an absent narcissist that is very insecure about the things that he does not have or that other people have, whereas Louis is this innocent manipulator that obviously, like, he has done nothing wrong in his life, right? And like, everything is other people's fault and he's just a poor victim, and then creates this incestuous relationship with the child, who is Claudia, who is obviously she's not at fault, but because of all this toxicity and all this manipulation and abuse, she turns to be evil and she turns to be this character that is defending the mother, like father slash lover. Like, that is also another kind of worms that I also need to talk about. And then when we go through the book, right, when Claudia and Louis go to Paris and then they just meet the other vampires and they meet Armand, I think Armand is the only character that seems to be reasonable and seems to understand what is going on, right? Like, I think he is under this Louis spell, right? Like, he obviously thinks of him as someone who is a victim, which in some sort of way he is, but also he's a victim of himself, right? But yeah, I think Arman is the only character that is sane and is the only character that tries to protect Louis, but then he tries to protect Louis, but also at the same time he knows that Claudia and the other character, the other woman, I always forget her name, but yeah, that Claudia is a danger for Louis, and that Lestat is a danger for Louis as well. So he finds that if he removes Louis and that he just basically deals deals with both Claudia and Lestat, then he knows that Louis will be finally free, right? And then we find that even though it is true that he, like, after dealing with Claudia and after dealing with Lestat, Louis is free, he finds himself, like Arman finds himself, just having to deal with Louis by himself, and just with Louis being, again, the innocent manipulator and the melancholic, depressed, sad guy that he always has been. So about the representation of vampirism, I think Anne Rice did a great job in representing this dichotomy between good and evil, right? Or between the good parts of vampirism, which is immortality, strength, and all of these, and also the bad parts of vampirism, which is literally murder, but also at the same time, what are the bad parts of immortality, right? Like, I think she did a great job representing all of these, of vampirism as a spectrum, because we see how there are individual differences in the way that we see vampirism represented, right? We see people that are not guilty at all of murdering in general, or like in just feeding, right? We see how there are people that don't treat humans as humans. They are nothing more than meat, or they are nothing more than something that they consume. Whereas we also see another side of vampirism, which is they feel like these vampires feel guilt and they mourn the victims that they feed on, right? Like, we also see it as well. And I think it's something very interesting. Like, the most specific, the part that I find the most interesting is the fact that we see how vampirism is literally a drug for humans, right? Like, the way that they, like, that vampires feed into humans, not as of to kill, but just as to feed, is something that is considered something like ecstatic, right? We see how all these humans that live after being fed on, we see how they become addicted to the feeling. They become addicted to vampirism in general, and to the character that has, or like the person that they that have fed on them, right? We see how these characters are like, they are, what's the name? They are enamored with the characters, with the vampires, because not only they have this vampiric spell, right, where it is like they see this perfect creature who is extremely strong, this literally like a superhero or like superhuman, but also at the same time they are beautiful, and they just bring this aura of mystery, of sensuality, of lust, and of sex, right? And it's something that is really attractive. But also at the same time, we also see how this addiction becomes literally the death of these characters that are attracted to vampires. Something that I also really liked about this book was the fact that we see different types of vampires, right? We obviously see the most human-like type of vampires, that is just humans, but vampires that look like humans and that behave like humans. But we also see the traditional folklore type of vampires, which is literally like undead people that just feed on humans, and they are not reasonable, right? And it's just like they are just monsters that feed from humans, in like when they go to Eastern Europe to find vampires, right? Like, that is just something that I also find really interesting, and that we don't really see in other types of content, or of like content that uses vampires as creatures. Now, getting into the analysis, I want to focus on something that I have noticed in the book. I don't know if we see it in the films or we see it on the series, but something that I see in the books is the way that immortality shapes the characters, right? And it literally just changes them, right? We see how Louis, for example, he, as a person, I would see Louis as a melancholic manipulator, right? Someone who is just like in such a depressive state that people just try to help him out naturally, right? That's the way that he unintentionally manipulates people. But when he is a human, we see him as someone who is extremely depressed and is thinking of killing himself, right? That's why he turns into a vampire, because he wants to punish himself for the guilt that he has for killing his brother, right? And then over time, with immortality, we see how this depressive state never really disappears. It just turns into something else, into it starts as the guilt for killing his brother, and then it just goes on with the guilt of killing people because of his feeling and because of his vampirism, right? And then it just turns into an overall melancholy that just makes him be who he is, right? For Lestat, for example, what I see, I think at first he is just a narcissist, right? We see Lestat as someone who is very proud of who he is, of his vampirism, and he always tries to hide the reality behind vampirism or behind what the vampiric world looks like, because he knows that that is a source of power for Louis and for Claudia. But then we see that overall, like over time, we see how he turns from narcissistic guy, or like a narcissist, to an insecure narcissist, right? We see how all the power that he had, or all the power that we see through Louis's eyes, we see turn into what is literally just a pathetic creature, right? An insecure narcissist that is trying to do the same that he did with Louis to other new vampires, but that doesn't really work because they are not Louis, and he's looking for Louis, or like he's looking for the next vampire that looks like Louis, because Louis is a perfect victim. And now for Claudia, I think she is the most interesting characters of all. Obviously, I have mentioned about how she grows up as a vampire, because obviously she doesn't grow, she's immortal, but she grows up as a vampire, not only as a child, because like obviously she is transformed when she is a child, but also she grows up in a very unstable and toxic environment, but obviously abusive environment. Like we see how as a child she immediately latches on to Louis, not only because he was the one that transformed her, but also at the same time because he is the one that wanted her, right? So she turns onto the golden child for Louis, the thing that will make Louis shut up, right? So it's like these kind of mothers that were represented in the like 50s, 60s, that is just like, I'm not gonna shut up, or like I'm just gonna disrupt you until you give me a child. And then once the father gives a child to the mother, then it's like, I don't need you anymore. You can be the absent father and absent partner that you originally want to be, because now I have someone on my side that is a child, right? And then we see how this incestuous emotional relationship grows. I fully believe that Louis was in love with Claudia, right? Even though she is technically an adult, or she is mentally an adult, she is a child, right? So therefore, I think that Louis was some sort of pedophile as well, which also makes me like him even less, because like he's just... Anyways, going back to Claudia, because like if I start talking about Louis, I'm not gonna shut up. So going back to Claudia, we see how she grows up as the golden child of like this very obviously abusive relationship, and then we see how she grows into being a young woman, but still with the body of a child, with the development or the brain development of a child, right? So we see that she's very mentally unstable. We see how she has no regards for humanity, because she has never really experienced humanity. She has no memories of humanity. And also she is obsessed with understanding vampirism, because that is the only roots to her real family that she has, right? That's why she is obsessed with vampirism and with other vampires. Also at the same time to escape from Lestat's claws. But I think the most important part is that I think internally, subconsciously, she wants to meet other vampires, and she wants to see other vampires in order for her to be free from Louis, and in order for her to be for Louis and her to also be free from Lestat, because she knows that if Lestat doesn't exist, or if there are other vampires apart from Lestat, that Louis would be free, because he will become independent from Lestat. And then when we get into the other characters or the other vampires that we see in Paris, I don't think I have that much context to talk about. I think I should read the other books that that Anne Rice published about this story. But I would say the main gist of it is that obviously they are like the Volturi, right? Like if you have watched Twilight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But they are like these ancient creatures that just control everything else and all the vampires and just create the vampire rules, right? Which I'm about to say at the start, it just doesn't really make sense, because it's like they are obviously Lestat, Louis, and Claudia. They are from like a whole different era, and they are from a whole different continent. So therefore, it wouldn't make sense for them to like deal with this as well, or like to just basically pay attention to the rules. But also, like, I do get why these rules exist, right? Like intrinsically. I also really, really like the essence of the theater de vampire. I'm not gonna lie. If I was in Paris and I heard that there's a club or like that there's a theater called like that, I will 100% go. Even if that meant that I could potentially be eaten by a vampire, I think it's worth the risk. Not gonna lie. So yeah, as a quick conclusion to my arguments, Interview with the Vampire would be 50 pages long if Louis realized that therapy exists. Like, just go get a Xanax, just pop one, and then just go with your day, right? Like, and at the end of the day, like, I think the vast majority, or like all the problems that we see in Interview with the Vampire is because of Louis's fault. Obviously, it is about Louis's life, so I understand that we have to talk about it, but you don't have to be so insufferable. Like, he is the kind of guys that you know very clearly that should go to therapy but refuse to go to therapy because they know that they can use all the trauma and they can use all the depression in order to manipulate you. That is literally what Louis is. Like, you can't change my mind about this. But now, as a serious conclusion, Interview with a Vampire is a great example of what vampirism is, and the line between good and evil in vampirism, and the way immortality shapes us, or shapes humans that have turned into vampires. And I also think it brings the best and the worst of both worlds, right? Of humanity and of vampirism, which I think is something that we don't really see in other content related to vampires. So I would say that Interview with the Vampire is an absolute must if you like vampires, or if you like Gothic horror. And I think it also brings a lot of the things that make this book really Gothic horror-y, right? And like, if you liked Nosferatu, this book will be for you, absolutely. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. And if you have read the book, or if you have watched any of the films or the series about Interview with the Vampire, and you have some comments that you would like to discuss, obviously please feel free to comment down below, or you can go onto my social media and we can discuss about that there, because you know that I always love to discuss books that I have read with other people. So please feel free to do so. And thank you so much for watching again. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.